now we move to our first international speaker, a man I think who is known by reputation to, I'd say, everyone in this room. We're very pleased indeed to have Enrique Penalosa to give us an address, sponsored by the Integrated Design Council. Just a brief CV, because I know it could go on for pages, but we know he's an eminent leader in the field of urban development, whose vision and achievements has influenced policies all around the world. He's currently giving advice and works on sustainability, on equity, on public space, on quality of life, and he's demonstrated organisational and leadership requirements that are needed to turn ideas and projects into realities. It's a very important element in all of this. He's an accomplished executive who achieves results. You, I think, know him best for his transformation when he was mayor of Bogota in Colombia. Of that city, he established a world-class model for sustainable development, making radical improvements in public transport networks and ensuring a significant social investment and creation of extensive urban greenways, for which he achieved international recognition. He's been the recipient of many awards, including the distinguished 2009 Göteborg Award for Sustainable Development. And of course, his work has been featured in many publications and documentaries, which was how we've come to know you. So thank you very much, Enrique, for addressing us today.
Thank you very much, Carmen, and thank you all. Thank you very much for the invitation to share with you some ideas. Of course, for me to be speaking about parks in Australia, which is one of the great places in the world for parks, is very intimidating. So I have to find what can I talk about which can add some value. I'd like to say that I will talk about urban parks, cities and parks. Natural parks are a treasure and are absolutely crucial, but today I will refer to cities. Can we design an urban park system if we do not know what kind of city we want? I don't think it is possible. First, we have to know what kind of city we want. It's very different if what we want is Manhattan than if what we want is Houston or Brisbane. What do we want? But even before that, we have almost to know how do we want to live, because really a city is only a means to a way of life. So when we are talking about a city, what we really are choosing is a kind of life. What kind of life will make us happier? And that leads us to something that is very difficult, because happiness is very difficult to define. It is impossible to measure, yet this is what really everything is about. So what can we do when we are passengers of this spaceship Earth? I mean, when we look at Earth from space, you see these insignificant little dots smaller than a grain of sand in a beach. And we realize when we see these pictures that we are really passengers of a self-sustaining spaceship. And when we see this, we all see each other, how close we are, all humans, Chinese and Greeks and Americans and Colombians. But once we come down to Earth, we realize we are not really so close. Especially, for example, if you are a Colombian, you would not believe how difficult it is to get a visa to go anywhere in the planet. So actually, you only have, of the whole universe, we only can be in our planet, and our whole planet, we only have a right to be in that little piece, which is our country. We may get permission to go somewhere else, but we do not have a right to go anywhere else. Then we go to our country, and we realize everything is private property. If we enter some private property in the land, we may even get killed for trespassing into private property. If we go into our city, we enter some apartment or somebody's home, and we may also get killed for trespassing. And we go out into the streets, and we also get killed by cars. So all of this story just to emphasize that out of the whole planet, of the whole universe, the only microscopic piece to which we really have access, free access, is to public pedestrian space in our city. Sidewalks, parks, bikeways, so it's a very unique and special space, and that is what I will try to talk about, and I think this is the most crucial part in our planet for our happiness, where we can have some influence. In the 20th century, we made huge mistakes with our human habitat. We made a habitat much more for cars mobility than for human well-being. Today, we tell any 3-year-old child in the planet, watch out, a car, and the child will jump in fright. And with a good reason, because there are tens of thousands of children who are killed by cars every year in the planet. This is not just theory. In the same way as when children in the Middle Ages used to be afraid of wolves, because there were wolves actually in the Northern Europe. But I can assure you that on any given year, there are more children killed by cars now than were eaten by wolves all through history. But what is amazing is not that. But it's amazing is that we think this is normal, that this is the way life is, that it's normal that we grow in fear of getting killed, and that this is normal. I think this is very wrong. It was not always like that, clearly. We have had cities for more than 5,000 years, and we have only had cars maybe for 80 years or so in significant amounts. This Chinese child, for example, maybe not on a bicycle, in an ancient city like that, they could go for miles without any fear of getting killed. The fact is that today, after all of this wonderful consciousness raising about the environment and Discovery Channel and Animal Planet and all of this, almost anybody has very clear what the ideal environment is for a happy whale or a happy mountain gorilla. It is much less clear to us what the ideal environment is for a happy child. I really believe that we do not have clear what an ideal urban environment is. What we do have some inkling is that what we have now is very wrong. I believe that in 200 years, we will very likely say, how could those, or we know those who will live then, will say, how could those people live in those horrible 2012 cities? In the same way, today we say how horrible London 1800 was. Yet, at that time, London was the most advanced city and the most imitated city in the planet. So what is a good city? I love a definition by Jan Gehl, a wonderful Danish urbanist, who says a good city is a place where people want to be out of their homes, not inside their home, not in the shopping mall, that they want to be out in public space, in cafes, in parks, in plazas. A good city tends to some needs that we have. We are pedestrians. We are walking animals. We need to walk, not to survive. We could survive inside an apartment all our life, order everything through internet. The same way a bird can live inside a cage. I see that birds in small cages, they even reproduce, and they bear little babies and the whole thing. But clearly we imagine one of those birds would be happier in a cage the size of this auditorium, and happier still going free. In the same way, we are much better off in a 10-meter wide sidewalk than in a 2-meter wide sidewalk. But this is some things that we cannot prove. I cannot prove mathematically, as well as with many things about cities. We don't really know what this is not technology, this is not science. So it's something we feel with our soul and with our heart. But clearly, a place where we need to walk. We also need to have contact with nature. A good city will provide contact with trees, with water. A good city, I would say, is one that is good for the most vulnerable citizens, for children, for the elderly, for the poor, for the handicapped. If a city is good for the most vulnerable citizens, it will tend to be good for everybody else. If it's good for children, for the elderly. A democratic city. All citizens are equal before the law is the first article in any constitution in the planet. I don't know the Australian constitution, but I am sure it's the first article. All citizens are equal before the law. This is not just poetry. If this is true, for example, a bus with 100 passengers or 50 passengers has a right to 50 times more road space than a car with one. If this is true, somebody on a bicycle has the same right to road space that somebody in a car. If all citizens are equal before the law, then public good prevails over private interest. And if public good prevails over private interest, there should never be private waterfronts, for example. Waterfronts in front of oceans, rivers, lakes should never be private homes or whatever private. So, now, if we accept that happiness has something to do with the realization of one's potential, I think most happiness has to do if we have potential to be musicians and we are able to be musicians, we are happy. If we are able to have talent for being cooks or painters, has a lot to do if we are talent for sports and we are able to do that. Now, then, what is the most sustainable habitat for Galapagos iguanas or for the eastern tube-nosed bat? I would say is this environment where these animals have why is the Galapagos iguana in the Galapagos? Because that's where this animal has the greatest possibility to realize its potential, to make use of all its capacities and realize its potential. So in this way, we could make a simile and to say that a sustainable city, before anything else, is the one that is most propitious for the realization of humans' potential. That's what a sustainable city is before anything else, for human. Now, for example, we have some very big and stingy red ants in Colombia. And a butterfly cannot stand up on this anthill and flap its wing on one of these anthills because it will be devoured by the ants. This does not mean that the anthill is not a sustainable habitat. It means that the anthill is a habitat for ants, not for butterflies. So, why do I mention this? Because many times we go to some extremes and we forget that those inhabitants of cities are humans. And before any other environmental consideration, we must imagine what is the design of waterfronts, of parks, of everything that is most propitious for human well-being, before anything else. A city friendly to cars or a city friendly to people, because there are some conflicts, clearly. We give more space to cars and we take it away from people. High-velocity roads are like fences that reduce our freedom. We cannot cross them. They are like fences in a cow pasture. I mean, look at this. Cars above, cars below, they were very nice to give this pedestrian space to people. This is, cars there, and they make big investment for cars, and then the people in the ground. This is, what this picture shows is that there are two kinds of citizens, that all citizens are not equal before the Orozco Institution says. This shows that car-owning citizens are first-class citizens, and these are third-class citizens. Well, this is a picture of lack of democracy. This is a picture that is, we are not making a habitat for humans, but for cars. Sidewalks, I would say, is the most important element of a democratic city. Clearly, you see, not even children are more important than cars. And don't you think you have to seek very hard to find these pictures? This is anywhere in any developing world city, all over the place, like this. In terms of infrastructure, what really makes a difference between a backward and advanced cities is not highways or subways, it's quality sidewalks. Even China, very advanced in many aspects, but it's a disaster in terms of sidewalks. Many American suburbs, they don't have sidewalks. They think it's very chic not to have sidewalks, just to have a rural-like environment. I don't know if in Australia they do this horrible design as well. I hope not. Colombia, as many developing countries, a disaster. Bogota, a disaster. I was almost impeached. I had my hair black before these battles. And we got cars out and made bigger sidewalks. And then people would tell me, Mayor, you are so stubborn, because there is enough space in sidewalks to park cars as well as for people to walk by. So we had to have a TV commercial where we said, look, we tend to think that sidewalks are relatives of streets because they live next to each other. However, sidewalks, unlike streets, are not for going from one place to another. They can be useful for that. And sidewalks are just for looking at the city, for talking, for playing, for doing business, for kissing. Sidewalks really are relatives of parks and plazas, not of streets. And to say that in a sidewalk there is enough space to park cars as well as for people to walk by is equivalent to saying that we can turn the main park or the main plaza into an open-air parking lot so long as we leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. Clearly, something not very logical. So we made big sidewalks all over Bogota, bigger, as big as we could make them. Good sidewalks all over places in the world, like in London. This is like, why am I showing this here? Because I think this is part of the urban park, or the urban pedestrian space system. This is crucial, and we'll get there. Ideally, all intersections, sidewalks should continue at grade at intersections to show clearly that it is cars that are going through pedestrian space, it's cars that are entering pedestrian space and not the other way around, pedestrians entering the car space. Now, in Bogota, we do some interesting exercises. For example, every Sunday, we close about 120 kilometers of main arteries for 7 hours, and Bogota is about an 8 million inhabitant city, and we get like 1.5 million people every Sunday riding bicycles, jogging. And this is a very beautiful ritual. It's a ceremonial, because while we is people reconquering the city for themselves, you could never appreciate the city in the same way as when you do it there in the space of cars. It's a very beautiful exercise. Now, bicycles. Bicycles are a very serious matter, and I would say they need serious investment in infrastructure. Why do people ride more bicycles in the Netherlands? It's not because it's in their genes. It's because they make the political decisions to make great quality bicycle infrastructure many years ago. The weather in Denmark or the Netherlands is much colder than most Australian cities. I mean, it's not the best for bicycling, and still you get, this is 10 degrees below zero, and you still see the people there, why are we talking about this? Because maybe we can make the city much more like a park, and there is a symbiotic relationship. We'll talk more about this between parks and cities. We cannot talk of parks if we don't talk about cities, about urban parks. I would not say that quality sidewalks or bicycle ways are a cute architectural feature. They are a right. What does it mean that it is a right? That if somebody gets run over by a car in a place where there is not a sidewalk, here I'm sure they would sue government and they would get a lot of money, I'm sure. The same thing should happen with bicycles. Some bicyclists who get run over by a car where there is not a protected bicycle way should be able to sue government, because we assume that only those in motor vehicles have a right to safe mobility, which is not a very democratic approach. Now, in Bogota, there was not 1 meter of bicycle ways, or people didn't use bicycles. We started to make a lot of bikeways, much before many countries did, after China, and of course after the Netherlands and Denmark. But now we have about 450 kilometers of protected bicycle routes, and we get more than 350,000, which is very small for our city, but still about 5% of the population now riding bicycles every day. For work and for recreation. A protected bicycle way is a symbol of democracy, because it shows a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. One of the important things of a protected bicycle way is not just that it protects the cyclist, it raises the social status of the cyclist, which in a poor society sometimes they feel insignificant. They feel like almost ashamed of using a bicycle. For example, he's very proud of his bicycle, you see. Now, ideally we should also have protected bicycle in rural roads, along rural roads, especially where we have a lot of traffic, where we have citizens. And ideally, along, of course, here you have along even the rural areas to go for traveling around for tourism. Now, cars, as I mentioned, are extremely recent in human history. This is Tokyo in the Middle Ages. Any child could walk for blocks without any fear of getting killed. Even afterwards, this is Modena. We tend to think that before cars we lived in caves. No, you see very sophisticated cities, you know. We had, for example, Paris, Beethoven. Beethoven had composed his music more than 100 years before cars appeared. It's not like we were savages before cars appeared, you know. There was science, there was music, there was, so it was possible. New York, 1905. Towards the end of the 20th century, we realized we had made a huge mistake, and we began to make reforms. This is like in Denmark. We began to take cars out and give more spaces to plazas, to people. All over Europe today, and in the whole world, there are hundreds and thousands of cities with the pedestrian streets only. In Santiago, this is interesting. In Manhattan, only a couple of years ago, they took half the space from Broadway away from cars and gave it to pedestrians and to bicycles. And part of this is not for a Sunday celebration. This is permanent. They completely closed Broadway to cars in several spots in Manhattan. Why not think different? Why not structure the part of our cities yet to be built, or even the cities we have around a network of streets for bicycle and pedestrian only, hundreds of kilometers long? I'll show you some project that we did in Bogota. This is a project we did where the city was growing. The promenade, bicycle and pedestrian only, 24 kilometers long through some of the poorest areas of our city. I think this could completely change the way of cities are organized. If cities were organized around networks of hundreds of kilometers long, just pedestrian and bicycle. Of course, this is a park or this is a road. I think this is much closer relative of park than of road, only for pedestrian and bicycle, 24 kilometers long through some very dense city. Bogota is one of the most dense cities in the world. We have 220 inhabitants per hectare, even though it doesn't look like it here. So this is, of course, initially the city was not yet there everywhere. Then this is after the city goes there, see the pedestrian street. This is a different concept in the way we organize cities, like having greenways and pedestrian streets going all over the city. See here, the city is only growing around it. Here we need some more trees here, but this is the concept. See, this is when the city is already grown around it. The park, the greenway, no cars, no road next to it. Look at the scale of this. This is the typical illegal neighborhood in Bogota, in Colombia. First, we did the pedestrian space, later the space for cars. See here, this picture is interesting. We have the park, the pedestrian, the bicycles, and the car in the mud. I would love to pave this street for cars, but if we don't have enough money, what do we do first? We are showing respect for human dignity, and this is the kind of thing, this investment in parks and pedestrian spaces that brought down the murder rate in Bogota from about one of the highest in the planet, 80 per 100,000 inhabitants, to less than 20 per 100,000 inhabitants in less than 10 years. Now, we invested in parks, in schools, in the pedestrian street, no paving for the streets. We had sewage and water and everything, but we did not have money to do everything. But what we did so tens of thousands of people use this to go to work every day. How would each of you's quality of life improve if within 2 or 3 blocks of your home, you would enter a giant network of pedestrian and bicycle streets only, even if you don't walk on the right bicycle, just to sit there and watch people go by without the noise of cars. And it costs nothing if we change the way we plan and organize our cities. This is not just for the poor. This is in Germany, the same in Münster. The main street in Münster is a pedestrian and bicycle street only, and half of the people there go by bicycle every day. Now, even we could do something similar. Why not create hundreds of kilometers of roads just for buses and pedestrian and bicycles only? This is a different way of thinking, of organizing cities. It completely would change our life. And it's very simple to do if we design it in this way. This is in Bogota downtown, for example. We closed some streets, on the most important street. Only we left buses. Our bus system we don't have time to describe, but it's perhaps the best mass transit bus base in the world. And pedestrian and buses only. Let's go quickly. Waterfronts. Waterfronts are so crucial. But in the 20th century, we put roads next to waterfronts. Engineers used to love to put roads next to waterfronts because it's the perfect place to go without intersections, unless you have a bridge. And if you need some more space, you just fill the water in. And then we realized towards the end of the 20th century, how stupid, how did we do this? And this is in Paris, for example, where Lady Di was killed, this highway next to the river, and people regret, the French regret very much having built this highway in the 1960s, Mr. Pompidou. So they close it all the time for bicycles very frequently. And in the summer, for the last 8 years, Mr. Delannoy, the mayor of Paris, put some palm trees, some sand, and says it's the Paris beach. And so they close it for a couple of months, and the idea is they're going to close it altogether. Waterfronts are a miracle, and you don't realize what you have in Australia because we have nothing like it in Bogota. So here is again in Copenhagen, how they demolished this to open up the water there, or pedestrianize this. In Seoul, of course, you must have seen this picture many times before. They invested $9 billion, not to build this highway, but to demolish this. Not because they had a waterfront like Adelaide, but because they had this creek there. In Boston, they invested $22 billion to demolish these highways and to put them underground because they went in front of the waterfront. All of this just to emphasize how crucial waterfronts are and what you have. Ideally, of course, waterfronts should have pedestrian infrastructure and the cars behind, no cars in front of them. This is in London, the Thames, but clearly, ideally, the building should be here and the cars behind, even though this has some nice sidewalk. But here, this is London, the same. Clearly, it feels much nicer when you don't have the cars around it. This is in Bonn, the buildings, the public greenway, and then the cars behind. In Bonn again, Manhattan. Some of the good areas, horrible waterfronts in Manhattan too, but this is a good one. The pedestrian park, the buildings, and the cars behind. So, here again in a beautiful place where they used to have cars in front and they closed the street. This is San Sebastian, one of the most beautiful cities in the planet. They put the cars behind. Well, here, of course, in Sydney, the wonderful and parks along the river. Here, there's a wonderful park. This is in Melbourne, and of course, I hear there is one similar here. Great things that I show all over the world about Australia. But here also in Australia or in South Africa, they have these kind of problems. I mean, if we had such a beach, we say, how can we put this parking lot next to the ocean, you know? It's very sad. This is not a very great urban design, you know? And this is in Perth. Now, we do not have anything like you have in Bogota, so we have drainage canals. So even then, even water is so magic, even that people like what you can do in a very poor neighborhood with a drainage canal. People like it, you know, even you can make into a nice area. Now, shopping malls. If shopping malls replace public space as a meeting place for people, it's a symptom that a city is ill. Because it's excluding. In a shopping mall, you don't see what's the nature. You don't see the trees, the birds. With globalization, all shops are the same. If they blindfold you and they put you a mall, you don't know if you're in Bogota, in Bangkok, anywhere. They keep the temperature the same all over the world. So now, plazas. Plazas is, no, I'm sorry. Low-density development. This is the big challenge in Australia, and I will talk a little bit about the relation. Low density, we know, is very bad because it's clearly, if Bogota had this type of structure, Bogota would be 20 times bigger with the same population. If we had this kind of density, this means Bogota, we have 215 inhabitants per hectare. Clearly, transport will be 20 times more expensive. It would be impossible to have low-cost, high-frequency public transport. This, of course, consumes much more energy. This is, of course, very bad for other things. Children, like 12 years old in the suburbs, they are like if they were handicapped. You know, parents have to drive. In a good city, any child should be able to, at 10 or 12 years old at the most, go anywhere by himself or herself, in a bus, in a bicycle. But in a suburb, they are like handicapped. They have to be driven everywhere. If in these suburbs people have to take a car to go buy bread or milk, if you have to have a car to go buy bread or milk, this means the city is not well designed. Now, we need density for fun, economy, and the environment. Australia's greatest urban and environmental challenge for the 21st century is to have denser city, to turn the inner suburbs into high-density environments. With all due respect, I will say challenge, propose some ideas. But not Hong Kong or Manhattan. We could have a city crisscrossed by miles of greenways, pedestrian and bicycle-only promenades, plus traditional streets with very wide sidewalks, high density with greenways going for hundreds of kilometers. The new dense Australian city cannot mean simply to put multi-story buildings where suburban houses now stand. It should be totally different urban environment. It does not yet exist. This is an interesting city in the Netherlands, Houten. It's only you can go by bicycle. It's a park with the city. You can go by car to your apartment, but you cannot go across the city. It's much faster moving by bicycle, and then there is a train going under it. So this is more the kind of, maybe we will have perhaps to demolish many of the inner suburbs in Australian city if we really mean to have higher densities. And of course, we may have higher buildings. This is not the way it should be. It's just some ideas. Now, height and density. More important than the height of building is what happens when the building reaches the ground, because the discussion whether it's 30-floor high or 30-story high or 60, I mean, more important than the height of buildings is what happens when buildings reach the ground. Does it become more pleasant to be there, to walk, to talk, to play, to kiss? I mean, this is a very high building, a wonderful, the famous building. Now, does public space around buildings become more pleasant when we make them? For example, this building, is it 30-story high or is 3-story high? Who cares? The important thing is what happens at the ground level. This is much more important. I'm not saying the height is irrelevant, but other things are more important. High density, of course, requires great parks. If we are going to have, if the great urban purpose of Australia is to have higher density for this century, this clearly requires parks, because one of the reasons why people go to the suburbs is to have more contact with green. So if we want higher density, we have to have a higher density which will have much more green. What we want is not Manhattan. It's high density, but in a very different way of design. High density and great parks. Great parks are almost a vaccine against urbanization. When we have high density, such as in Bogota, I realize, why do people want to go to the suburbs in Bogota? Because they want to see green. If we were able to provide green, 90% of the people who go to the suburbs, they would not want to go. So, quality density requires great parks, but I would also propose to you something. Great parks require density. Would Central Park work as well in a suburb? I mean, clearly, it would not be Central Park. It may be a nice garden, but we need density in order to have great parks. Parks are also about being with people. This is some studies have made which show that the benches most used in parks are those where most people walk by. We want to be in the parks and be in contact with nature, but parks are about people. I mean, a piece of Colombian Amazon forest is beautiful. It has birds and monkeys and trees, amazing, but this is not a park. It's a different. A park is for people, especially urban parks, not national parks. A park is to be with people, to see people, to do activities such as these Chinese parks, which are full of all kinds of activities, the elderly, the children. People like to go there and be in contact with nature, but be in contact with people as well. I lived in a while in a New York suburb, and there I was very happy that there were gardens in the homes because they give a lot of work to Mexicans and Colombians who mow the lawns. But actually, People don't do anything ever in these gardens. Children were never in those gardens, even if they were giant gardens. Children like to go to the park because that's where other children are. The best toy for a child is another child. Children are wise, and they know they want to be with other children. And adults as well. Adults like to be in restaurants where there are many people. People could go, instead of going to the beach, they could take sunbathe on the roof of the apartment. But of course, it's much more fun to be at the beach with people. So people and parks is a symbiotic relation. Children like to go where other children are, and this is the fun park where the other children are. Parks is a fantastic thing. They are a public good. Not even the wealthiest billionaire can buy a park. He could make a park, you know, buy the land and make the landscape, the trees, the lakes, the paths, but this would not be a park. You know, this may be a very fine garden. A park is its relationship to the city. We cannot talk about parks if we do not talk about the city. Public consumption, this is something very fascinating about parks. Public consumption, when we think about parks, can provide more pleasure than private consumption. I mean, many people would be willing to have less, don't change jacket or don't renew the car every so many, but have a great park nearby. This is one of the few things people are willing to pay more taxes for, to have great parks nearby. But government makes a big mistake because it bundles all the taxes into one big pot, and then people don't like to pay taxes to something they don't even know what money goes for. But if we were able to channel, to funnel money, just some special tax that goes to parks, I think people would be very happy to pay this, which they would not necessarily be for other things. The concept of parks, of course, can be different. I mean, a city is not just the regular park. We cannot think of the traditional parks. Maybe the future city will have hundreds of kilometers of greenways going all over. We should be able to go across the city in every direction through a greenway by bicycle. Now, plazas are spaces for human comfort and conviviality. Plazas are a very special place. They come from a time when nature surrounded all, when nature was not beautiful and romantic, but the contrary. It was full of mosquitoes, and it was a threat, and people wanted to escape nature. And so, in the Middle Ages, nature was not something wonderful. In the Middle Ages, it was a threat. We wanted to be protected from nature. And plazas, of course, at that time, there were no malls either. People were at the plaza. It was the mall of the time. Plazas are parks where humans are the center, and the source of beauty is not nature, but human creation, architecture, design. Now, do we need to play? Is it something, I believe that we need to play. If we need to play, but for example, every city has regulations, at least in Bogota, where there should be a light, a lamppost, every so many meters. Everybody knows. But do we have, for example, in our city regulations, the maximum distance at which a child should grow from a park? I think this kind of thing should be written down somewhere. I mean, many studies show that people go to, I mean, there are some metropolitan parks, but there is neighborhood parks. And people go to a neighborhood park if it's closer than 4 blocks. They don't go any farther. So maybe we should put this down as a regulation, and this is a requirement for urban design, the same way we have engineering designs to put lampposts every so many meters. I mean, higher income citizens have always had access to nature at beach houses, mountain chalets, vacations in Africa, but parks allow the rest of society to have that contact as well. Now, if parks are as necessary as roads, schools, or hospitals, planning and budgeting processes should reflect that. Is public space a frivolity in a developing country with much poverty? I do not think so. Look, when people are at work, even in a very poor city like Colombia, maybe the president of the company and the lowest employee who cleans toilets or floors maybe are equally satisfied. They go to work, they meet their friends. The huge difference in quality of life is felt during leisure time. When the upper income person goes to a large home, to vacation homes, to theater, to restaurants, and the low income person goes to a very little house, sometimes just a room where the whole family lives, and the only alternative to television during leisure time is public pedestrian space. So I would say the least of the least that a democratic society should provide all citizens is quality public pedestrian space. Parks, sidewalks, sports facilities, pedestrian promenades. This is our children. Look, this is the illegal neighborhood. Typical developing countries. Well, so and so. This is, I mean, the least these children need is a great park. No? This is a house. You know, this guy, what he's doing in this house is cleaning, is sweeping the ground in front of his homes. Don't you think these guys deserve, at least for him and his children, a decent park? I mean, we cannot provide him great luxuries. We are not going to provide him a car. We are not going to provide him a computer. But we can provide him a great public pedestrian space and at least great quality sidewalks, at least now. The importance of public pedestrian space cannot be measured. But most important things in life cannot be measured. I mean, love, friendship, beauty, anything that really matters, we cannot really define very well or measure. Anything that really matters in life. And this is the kind of pleasure that parks provide. We cannot really measure it. So important are parks that, let me show you this picture. In one of the poorest illegal neighborhoods in the hills around Bogota, there was only one little piece of flat land. And they built homes all around. The only piece of flat land they left was for the park, for the playground. Clearly, they showed the people for people. This is extremely important. I want you to see this picture that we did in Bogota. This is the space for children, the park that we built in some of these illegal neighborhoods in the process of legalizing. The next picture is the same picture. The space for children, the space for cars. So, and the sidewalks and the park. I would love to pay this street too, but if we don't have enough money, what do we do first? This is a political decision. 4 parks, 4 pedestrian space. Parks are most needed in poorer areas, in the slums of all over the developing world, like in South Africa, like this great park we built in Bogota, in some of the poorest areas of the city, in the smallest parks in the neighborhoods. I mean, these synthetic field, soccer fields, we found this was much more effective than to have a police station in the neighborhood. This creates the young people go do sports, they meet each other, and the crime goes down, plummets. Now, in the future, low-income citizens will have everything the rich have now. They will have computers, cars, everything. What they will not have, unless we do something about it, is access to green. I would say that in developing countries, access to green in the future will be the main source of inclusion or exclusion. People should be able to have access to green without being members of a country club. And this is something we cannot solve because in the future, we will have better hospitals. We will be, I mean, if we become richer, we have better hospitals, better food, better schools. But if we do not save the land now for parks, I mean, if we do not do a sewage treatment plant for the river now, we can build it 20 years from now. If we do not do a hospital now, we can build it 20 years from now. But if we do not save the land for parks now in these cities, which are growing very fast in the developing world, it will be very difficult to demolish 50 hectares of city to open up parks. And this is something crucial to do now, and no land is being bought for parks in most developing countries. So it's not just the problem for now, but for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years, millions and millions of people will be less happy because this land is not being bought and saved for the future. They were not, as in Australia, which you did really, you know. Now, so we have to buy land, parks for people. Now, parks for people. A park's success is not determined by architectural prices, but its attractiveness to people. How much do people want to go there, to stay there? How many people go to it? More important, we have a lot of discussion. Now, somebody discovered about 15 years ago how many meters of public space per inhabitant. Oh, we need so much, and the United Nations have some, you know, much more important. Of course, this is important, but more important than square meters of park per person is the amount of people per square meter of park. Is the quality of parks maybe more important even than the amount, because this is almost an irrelevant discussion. How many square meters of of parks per person? We need great design for people, not for prices of architects, so that people love to be there. Now, in public pedestrian space, of course, one of the great things is that we meet as equals. One measure of a great park is that it attracts wealthy and poor people. This is very obvious to you in Australia, maybe, and even more so in New Zealand. But in developing countries, it's extremely rare to find spaces where rich and poor meet as equals. A great city, I would say, must have at least one great public space. What is a great public space? One where even the wealthy cannot avoid going to. They would like to, but they cannot. It's just too great, you know? In Central Park, there must be every day many people who may have billions next to others who don't even have a place to sleep that night. Now, I'll show you, to finish, some of the battles we gave for parks and plazas in Bogota. A former mayor had given this park to one of the city's professional soccer team, and we took this away from them. Sports journalists still hate me for it, but we created this park. I mean, they were going to make a private club for the professional soccer team. And nobody had protested because nobody was aware of this. Here, this had been taken completely by a mafia of vendors, a plaza downtown, and we were able to recover this to create this space for people and to lower crime rates around tremendously. We had to demolish 2 blocks away from the presidential palace in the center of Bogota. We had the most horrible area taken by drug dealers. And I mean, a 4-year-old child, for example, a 4-year-old boy when I was mayor was raped and castrated. This is the beautiful thing that happened there. Completely degenerate area, and we were demolished 23 hectares, 600 buildings to create. The police would not go there, would not go inside there, even though it was 2 blocks away from the presidential palace. So we demolished this, the green place there, and we made a 23-hectare park in the middle of the city. Central Park, of course, this is not ours, but why do I show this? Because one of the great things of Central Park is that it was not like European parks. European parks, the great parks, used to be the gardens of kings. And sometimes it was necessary to cut their heads in order to turn this into parks. This was a park of a democracy. All developing worlds today, excepting for a few in Africa, are richer than New York was in 1860 when they created Central Park. Most developing worlds. And nowhere we are having these developing cities making these investments in parks. I don't see anywhere in the developing or very rare that we do anything similar to this. But then what happens? This is still similar, except that this is in Bogota. This is the most exclusive country club in Colombia. So we said, if there is democracy and public good prevails over private interest, this should be a public park. This was the most powerful people in Colombia. Not easy. My hair was even whiter then. We were not able to turn the whole club into a park, but we were able to take away the polo fields. And if we have to use eminent domain sometimes in order to turn golf courses or even private homes into parks. This is in Kibera, in Nairobi, one of the biggest slums in the world, horrible poverty, and look what you have here. I mean, if we have democracy, clearly, we have to use eminent domain to turn this into a park for the hundreds of thousands of children who live here. But clearly, I mean, this is very obvious. I mean, democracy is not just the fact that people go vote. Now, JICA, the Japanese Cooperation Agency in Bogota, they proposed all kinds of crazy elevated highways and highways all through Bogota, and one of them was through here. And we had a war because we did not do the highway, but we made a 35-kilometer greenway where tens of thousands of people go to work through the Juan Amarillo Greenway by bicycle. This is where the highway was proposed. We even had to cut another golf club because we had to put this thing next to it. Another little bottle. This is about a 35-kilometer greenway. Now, our parks program was large and was done very carefully, so we had very happy that for the first time in history, the National Architectural Prize was not given to an architect, but to the parks program of the city, which was an interest. Because, of course, I'm not going to show you, but we did about almost 1,000 small parks and things all over the place, all over the city. I like to show you this because this is interesting. This is a Gallup poll. It says, Penalosa, when I was mayor, for all these battles, see? This is, at one point, this is my negative image 77. The blue is positive, the blue is negative, and the red is positive. So I was almost impeached I was public enemy number one for fighting for public space, for getting cars off the sidewalks, for all of this. Happily, when I finished my term, I had the highest positive image a mayor ever had in the history of Bogota. But this is to show you how painful, when I am talking to you, it's not just as a theorist. It's somebody who suffered for it heavily. Now, how should a good city, and I'm 2 minutes and I'll finish. How should a good city distribute road space? Road space is the most valuable resource a city has. You could find oil or diamonds under Adelaide, and it would not be as valuable as road space. Now, how should you distribute road space between pedestrians, bicycles, public transport, and cars? All I am trying to say is that this is not a technical decision. This is a political decision. If there is no such a thing as a natural use of car in a city. If there was more space for cars in New York or in Paris or in London, there would be more cars. If there was less space for cars, there would be less cars. Simple as that. So it's not like there is a technical. See, here there is more space for sidewalks than for motor vehicles in London. This is not because some traffic engineer gave permission to the mayor of London to do this. This is a political decision. Why not give pedestrians and bicycles the space taken today by curbside parking in Australia? Why don't get rid of street parking and make bigger sidewalks, for example? I'm not saying you should do it or not. All I'm telling you is that this is a political decision. There is nothing technical about it. Parking, I know many constitutions, is not a constitutional right, you know? Many constitutional rights, but one of them, so if the people, when parking is taken away, go to the mayor and tell, where should we park now? The mayor can tell them, it's as if you ask me where you should put your food or your clothes. This is not my problem. You put them wherever you want, you know? I have no obligation to tell you where to put your food, you know? Now, if we go to the shop and we buy something, the pleasure we derive from things we buy, 2 months later, if we go buy some shirt, 2 months, or anything we buy, 3 or 6 or 1 year later, this doesn't yield any pleasure. Parks are a magical good. It's amazing. It's the only thing I know in the planet that's something. It's the only thing that we have that 1 year can go by, 2, 3, all our lives, and the pleasure they yield does not diminish. It's a magical good whose capacity to yield happiness and pleasure does not diminish. It's different from all other goods that I know of in the planet. We can visit them daily, several times a day, see them from the window every day, 1,000 times, and the joy they provide does not diminish. So, I finish. A good city should feel like a park, integrated with nature, extremely safe and pleasant to children, pedestrians, and bicycles, the whole city. In every detail, I think a city should reflect that human beings are sacred, and it should also reflect that they are equal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a splendid address. And we have some time for questions as well, so that's a double blessing. I'll scan the crowd and indicate if anyone would like to ask a question. Otherwise, morning tea, lunch, give it a second. It usually takes 1 or 2. You have a heartbeat or 2 or 3.
Or comments or criticism, not just questions. When you're radically in disagreement, welcome.
Gentleman over here. Speak up. Stand up and speak up. Thank you. There's a microphone coming.
I cannot hear, I'm sorry. No.
I'm wondering, what was the time period over which all of the development in Bogota occurred?
Well, I was mayor. All of the things I showed, things that we did, only 3 years, between 98 and 2001. It was rough. There was no re-election there, unfortunately, so we had to run. So it was to 2001. But the other mayor that came after, he also continued much of the process. I mean, not so many new things, but there were many other things that we did that were very interesting. For example, we did not have money for subways. This is too expensive. Plus, I don't think we should put public transport users underground. unless we don't have any other space. But first, we should give buses exclusive lanes in roads. So we created a bus-based system where it's really like a subway with buses. People pay when they enter a station. When the bus arrives, the articulated two-bodied or three-bodied buses, doors open, so you can get 80 people out of the bus and 80 people into the bus in seconds. We copied this from Curitiba. It's not our invention. But this system is moving more passengers our direction than all subways in the world, except for 4 or 5. What is interesting is, again, the democratic symbol. When the upper-income citizens' cars are in the traffic jam, the buses zoom by next to them, and that is very nice. Of course, they are very crowded and all this. They have to be improved, but this is some of the things that we did.
Over here, yes? You have that microphone?
Here I can hear.
You talked about the dropping crime rate, and you also made the point that the good things can't be valued or measured, can't be measured. Has anyone done any research around the health and well-being benefits of some of the work that you did?
Not that I know. Only I know there have been some health benefits related to the closing of the streets that we do every Sunday, that 1 million people go out to jogging. By the way, this was not my invention either. This comes from before. We just doubled the length of this. But for that, some research has been done, and there is very significant improvements. Now, something that may be interesting for you who are in parks is, why did the crime rate drop? Nobody really understands very well, but to me, it's very important. If we have great parks and people are in the park with the family, it's less likely that they're getting drunk and shooting each other on Sundays, that's one. Also, orderly public pedestrian space, nice sidewalks, when there is order and not chaos, so people tend to behave better. But more important, and most important, I feel, is the following. It's a concept of legitimacy. Legitimacy is a very interesting concept. It's not an objective measure. It's not like once you have so much enrollment in schools or so much mortality rate, you have legitimacy. Legitimacy is the perception that people perceive its society is just and fair. And when 80% of homes don't have cars, all investment in pedestrian spaces are showing respect for human dignity, are telling the people who are low income that they are important. So clearly, all of these works that construct equality make for a society that is more legitimacy. When society is more legitimate, people will obey more the law, they will denounce more those who break the law, and they will even demand punishment for those who break the law. So I think public pedestrian space, but again, this is very difficult to measure, you know? It's not like, there have been some health measures, but only in relation to the closing of the streets, which have yielded some very positive results.
Time for one more question. Yes, over here.
Enrique, that was absolutely sensational. I'm interested in the capital cost, though. Colombia has a lot of challenges and a lot of demand, and this sounds like a very substantial capital investment. So I wondered where the funding came from.
Well, actually, when you really see this, nothing is very costly. What we invested, for example, for the bus system, is the same roads that we have, basically a little better, except that we made some beautiful sidewalks and bicycles streets next to them, but it's the same cost of a traditional road. To make sidewalks, I mean, it's more the political cost than the economic cost. We did not do, there were some big expenditures making some beautiful schools. We did some interesting things we did some beautiful school buildings in developing world, backward developing world countries. The upper income people, not upper income, the middle classes, I mean, 35% of people at least, like in Bogota, go to private schools. So we built beautiful schools in the poorest neighborhoods, But more interesting than that, we brought the best private schools in the country and the best private diverse universities to manage these schools. So again, a very big battle with the unions, so teachers' unions, but with an amazing result. But the cost, the important cost of this library and all this is this is the things that were costly. We built a bunch of big libraries that they were no libraries in Bogota. We built 4 beautiful big libraries and many small ones. But actually, it was not beyond our cost. We invested maybe a little less in roads, even though we invested in roads too. We increased taxes, some. For example, we increased gasoline. We put a gasoline surcharge, 25%. We was in 10%. We brought it to 25%. Surcharge on gasoline. First, we put it just for the city, but of course, everybody would go to the municipality next door to get fuel. It was even dangerous. They would keep fuel at the garage and things. So we went to Congress and approved the fuel surcharge for the whole country, but for the regional governments. And we, in order to bring the water and sewage to the poorest neighborhood, we increased the water and sewage rates of the water companies, some, but most of the things that we did is really nothing extremely expensive. It's nothing very, it's more the different in the emphasis. Like for example, with all the money in the world, this kind of pedestrian infrastructure that we build, like these pedestrian highways that I showed you, would have never been built otherwise. This is not so costly, it's just a different way of imagining what could be done. The cost was political, not so much economic. Thank you very much.
Enrique, thank you.